Okay, cool. How many of you have actually read the U.S. Constitution? Yeah, good, pretty good. All right, now the trick question. How many of you have read the Indiana Constitution?
I've read some.
I've read some of yours.
Well, good. That's even better. Guys, if you've read the federal Constitution, how much of the federal Constitution do you think applies to your daily life?
7%.
Not very much, unless you're a pirate or something like that. You really shouldn't run into the federal Constitution in your daily life, right? So what really describes your rights as a citizen in the United States of America? If you know, the Constitution of the United States is interesting, and you really need to read that. But really, you should read the Indiana Constitution if you really want to know what your rights are, and if you really want to understand what the federal Constitution means. Now, can we bring up the Indiana Constitution?
Yeah.
In fact, I can stand this around. It says in any
We can roll this a little bit if you want.
Do you guys understand what the, I don't know, I probably should find some common ground here first before we get on too much into talking about what all of these words mean, because we've had an awful lot of trouble with words over the last 100 years. In fact, since FDR's For Freedom speech, even the idea of freedom doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, what's freedom from what? Freedom from fear. What is that supposed to mean? Does anybody have an idea in your mind about what liberty really means to you? Does anybody here, can somebody give me, and anybody want to raise your hand and give me an idea what liberty means to you? What's liberty? Yes?
That's the ability to own our property and to not have our property inflicted on or in any way taken away from us.
That's a very good start. That's a pretty good definition. Anything else?
Our inherent ability to be self-sovereign.
See, all of these things involve some words that have been challenged of late. You know, even the idea of property, what you can own, what you can't own. You know, the idea of owning your body makes sense to libertarians, but you know, when we have a communalized system, we always have to live with other people. And when you've got to share certain kinds of, I don't know, if you have anything you want to call government, so you're going to have some way to pay for it. You're going to start putting hooks in your neighbor to pay for it. You have something else you want to say?
I was just going to the right to do, or the ability to do as you wish with yourself and your property, as long as your actions do not infringe the physical integrity of another person's life or property.
Well, that's a much more complete definition, and I could go with that very well. The idea that, you know, that you can do what you want as long as you're not imposing force on somebody else. But then there also comes a point at which we have to decide, what are we going to do to prevent somebody engaging in force against you? What if somebody wants to take your property? What if somebody wants to dam up your stream? What if they want to put some kind of plant next to your farm and they're going to start spewing smoke into your property? You know, all of these things are issues that we're going to have to deal with in some way or another. So you have to describe some stuff, right? You have to have some ground rules. You have to have something written down by way of contract that you can talk about. You stay on your side of the fence. This is my fence line. We have arranged this somehow. We got it written down somewhere in a plat book or something like that. We have to have some stuff written down, right? We can't just have the idea that freedom is we can do whatever we want. We don't have any rules. And in fact, if you guys ever become parents, I don't know if any of you guys are parents, but you know, a good part of what you are going to call freedom is having somebody, if you have a fence in your backyard, you'll feel free to let your kids out there, knowing that if they can't climb the fence or if they can't get out or other things can't get in, can't get, you know, mean dogs attacking your kids, you feel freedom within certain restraint, much more than you would if you just say off on your own kids and it's a wild world out there with bears and politicians and stuff like this. So if you really want real freedom, you have to have some rules. And you know, let's kind of lay some groundwork here. Humans are not very nice creatures. We're not civil by nature. Our default state, and we do have one by the way, humans' default state, which you can see in any history book, is oppression, slavery, genocide, and war. That's what we do. That's what we're going to do to each other if you don't stop us somehow. So we have to energetically oppose that nature of ours to kill each other, to steal stuff, to cheat, to lie. We're naturally pretty bad. And so the idea that, you know, there's some sort of natural goodness that's just waiting to come out of us, that's BS. And you guys should know that by now. If you look at any history book, there is no evidence of any good nature in human beings. We're nasty, and we have to have something, by way of some ground rules to curb them. And so, while I'm a libertarian, and a lot of people think that libertarians are, we're anarchists, we don't want any rules and stuff, that just can't happen. You have to understand that human beings need to have some rules in order to be something like free. And what I'm calling free is, there's a lot of abstraction we have to deal with. We have all kinds of abstractions with political parties. We have abstractions with the whole idea of freedom and liberty and all of that stuff. And we really have to get down to a much more basic understanding of how you want to live. And you guys have more freedom than you've been led to believe already. We've all had more freedom than we've been led to believe. We can choose how we want to live. Here in the United States of America, we don't even have a dictator we can blame for anything. We have exactly what we, the people, have chosen. We've picked all of it. We voted for it over and over again for the past 100 years to have a system of cronyism with two unchallenged parties that run everything through the same guys behind the curtain. So basically, you've got the same money power brokers that have been running the world for a long time, the old money changers that have been around for thousands of years. We've chosen it again. We can choose not to do that anymore. We can fix it anytime we want. It's a choice. You have the freedom to choose how you want to live. And so the first thing, before we get into the words of the Constitution, is to understand that we don't have that right now. Right now, we don't have constitutional rule of law. You can choose to have it if you want. But what that means is you're going to have some kind of picture in your head about what this means, and then you have to decide whether you want it, and then there's an action plan. You can vote for this thing. You can actually support this thing. You can look for candidates who are supporting the constitutional rule of law as you see it, and you can put them in office. You can run for office yourself. All these things are choices. So are we clear that you guys can have what you want if you really want it? And most of the time, I get into groups of people and I start talking about what do you really want. And sooner or later, it turns to matters of, I don't know, pick a subject. There's always going to be some subject in which you can turn even to the lady who sits next to you in the church pew. And she's going to turn to you and say, kill them all. There's always some kind of subject where you're talking about what are we going to do about Iran? Are they going to get nuclear weapons? Or what should we do about those French? We've had it with them. Whatever the case is, there's always something that we fear. We want something we don't have. We're afraid for our future. And those things are what often make us screw up when it comes to this constitutional rule of law. So as I'm describing what this actually means, just kind of keep in mind that we've chosen the opposite of all of this because of our fears, because of our ineptitude with our own lives and our own destinies. We wanted to delegate things away to this abstraction we call politics. We've given stuff up from this by choice. We've done it ourselves. And one of the first things I want to point out about the Constitution is that if you read the federal Constitution, you might have seen a phrase in there that was kind of interesting about the president's power of commander-in-chief when called into the actual service of the United States. Now, I don't know if you guys ever thought that was a throwaway phrase, but let me just back up a little. I'll introduce my annotated Constitution. I've got a copy of the Indiana Constitution and the U.S. Constitution in a couple of different places. This is pulled off the wedeclare.wordpress.com site. That's my personal blog. I'm probably going to take that down fairly soon. But I'm going to have all this stuff linked to my campaign website, morningforsenate.com. It's also on the Libertarian Party of Indiana website. We're going to have updated versions of the U.S. Constitution and Indiana Constitution. They have a table of contents. They've got at the end an index. I think my commentary in between is helpful. I've got it all in boxes and in italics so you can tell which is words of the Constitution and which is my commentary on it. And I think if you were to go through and see even the longer, Indiana Constitution, with my annotations and a table of contents is only 46 pages long. Now, knowing you guys being like Ron Paul kind of folks in general, you've probably read more than this just out of like the Patriot Act or something. You've probably read more pages of just about any sort of commentary from people you're mad at. than you've read out of the Constitution of Indiana, which is the contract that determines your rights as a citizen in Indiana. I really encourage you to take some time to read this Constitution. It's not great reading. There's no plot. In fact, there's a lot of stuff I would change if I could. I don't really like the Indiana Constitution. I don't like the federal Constitution very much. They're not magical documents, but they are contracts between people like me and people who want more government. They're contracts between, people of different types, and they have been proven to work if we do them. And so my point behind the constitutions is not that they're perfect. In fact, the history behind the Indiana Constitution is a little bit disturbing and a little bit bad, just in terms of what led to this 1851 Constitution after we had a much better Constitution written in 1816. And I've got a little bit, just a little bit of an introduction and a historical context I put in this Indiana Constitution. I think it's helpful in understanding where we went wrong the first time, why we got this second Constitution, and tellingly, some of the stuff that we've been talking about lately, with especially like the Kernan-Shepard Commission, and some of the proposals from governors from, I'm not going to mention any names, the guy who's governor right now, for instance, but some of these people who want to do some of the stuff that we got rid of, some of the best stuff that we got from the 1851 Constitution, they want to undo, to go back to the mistakes we made 150 years ago with the Kernan-Shepard Commission to devolve these elected local governments into central appointments. We're going back to a Politburo idea. Anyway, if you look at the history of the Constitution and you look to some of the particulars, you look to see how it's been amended over the years, you'll find lots of compromises, lots of stuff that is not very likable if you look at it from a libertarian context. But if you look at it from where we're at right now, oh my gosh, it is so much better. Article 8, which is something a lot of people have problems with from a libertarian bent because it's basically the contract for a socialized school system. It's in there. Article 8 does describe a socialized school system. It was written, in fact, by the ONLs. These people who were socialists, who coined the term socialist, they were the original socialists in the 1820s. They put this Article 8 in here. But it is better than what we're doing right now. And if you look to see that it's got its own funding, it's got an endowment fund that would be perpetuated by a means that's actually written into the Constitution, it's all way better than what we have right now. I also want to point out that from this Indiana Constitution, and I don't think I need to go through it to point out verbatim stuff, but if you go through here, the things I want you to take a note of is that the actual commander-in-chief, when we're not in a state of war with other countries or declared by Congress of the United States, the commander-in-chief is the governor of Indiana. He is the commander-in-chief of the Indiana militia. And if you want to know who the militia is, well, you're in it. I'm in it. All of us are in it as far as what the original design of the Constitution was supposed to be. Now, I don't know, that seems awful, that's a big nut to swallow for an awful lot of people. And it is a huge change. I don't know that everybody in this room really understands what a huge change it would be just to go back to the constitutional design as written, as amended. Because even now, after years of amending both the federal and state constitutions, it is still the law that there is no standing army. Does anybody know that? So if you know that we're not supposed to have a standing army, and that the so-called aptly named Dick Act of 1903, that was actually supposed to suck up the state militias into a national army, but they never amended the Constitution to do that. They didn't amend the federal Constitution. They didn't amend the state constitutions. And the portions of the state constitution dealing with the commander-in-chief being the governor of all of that, that was amended as recently as the 1980s. And so we're still looking at constitutions that describe a condition more like Switzerland, where we have a citizen army, where it's not the militias that you hear about. I'm from Freedom, Indiana. When I say I'm from Freedom, Indiana, people think, oh, militias. And we have these people down there that's sort of the backwoods militia type. And that's not what I'm talking about. It's not the kind of militia where you have a bunch of guys dressing up on weekends and putting on their deer hunter stuff and blowing up targets. That's not the militia. The militia is supposed to be a disciplined bunch of people. We're called up every now and then. We're trained to use guns. It's kind of like the National Guard is today, but this is supposed to be how we defend our country. And if you think about what that really means in terms of, what we've been fighting over the last 100 years, we had a hard time with Vietnam. We had a hard time with Afghanistan. You look to see how much money we poured into our military, what kind of weaponry we have. We still have a hard time fighting civilian militias, citizen armies, people just at the guerrilla level fighting us. And if we had the sort of army that we were supposed to have, nobody would come over here and fight the United States of America. I mean, I could get a truck full of guys from Owen County, just these deer hunters alone. I could take care of terrorism worldwide if I just gave them some body bags and tags and said, all right, you can't use your muscle calls or anything like that. There's some rules. But if you were serious about fighting an army, that's maybe global in nature, maybe it's well funded. If you were serious, then you would take this thing more seriously and understand that the design was that all of us were supposed to have a stake in the game. All of us were supposed to be, trained to use weapons and understand that this is dangerous, this is scary, war is ugly, we don't want to do it, we don't want to bring it to our homes, but if somebody brings it to us, we're ready to fight back. Now, I'm kind of dwelling on this part a little bit because this is probably the toughest thing for most people to handle out of the current design of the constitutions. We're not supposed to be an imperial power. We're not supposed to have our armies in, what is it, like 80% of the nations on Earth right now? There are like 190 nations, and we've got our armies in 100 and something. You think about how many nations we've got our armed forces in, and those armed forces are pointing guns at all of the other nations. We are a belligerent power, and that was not supposed to be the case. We were supposed to be, pretty much like you want your neighbor to be. You don't want to step on his property because he's probably got a shotgun or something like that, and he defends his property. Maybe you got a nasty neighbor, but he's nice as long as you stand on your side of the fence. That's kind of the way nations are supposed to be. My idea is not necessarily peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations. It's really more or less peace, commerce, and a little bit of healthy suspicion. But the idea that we should have trade relations with everybody, we should be armed to the teeth, but otherwise, by the constitutional design, we're supposed to stay home, tend to our businesses, tend to our families. That kind of leads me to the next part of the constitutional design. Government, as we imagine it, is really supposed to be like a junkyard dog. It's really supposed to stay in the junkyard. All it's supposed to do is guard your junk. If you think about what, a government, what you want politicians to do, I imagine everybody in this room, I'd be fairly safe in asking people here, what do you want government to do? And most of you would say not very much at all. How much interference do you want in your life? Well, not very much at all. But I also suspect that if I went to the Occupy Wall Street people and say, how much, police force do you want in your life? You'd probably say not very much at all. They might want stuff. They might want us to pay for their college. They might want all kinds of stuff. But when you get down to the brass tacks, if you were to talk to these guys and ask them, really, how much force do you want to employ against your neighbor? Let's not talk about rich people for a while, because maybe you're talking to a bunch of people who hate rich people we want to eat. Those are not the ones that you want to carry on a conversation with. But if you can get to the more reasonable Occupy Wall Street people, and you can ask them, all right, what do you want? I'll give you maybe a laundry list of stuff. How much violence are you willing to invoke to get that stuff? Because what we're talking about with politics is violence, right? Does anybody have a different view of politics than I do? Is it something other than, sort of delegated violence? Is there anything government can do without at least the threat of jails and bombs and judges and prisons and all of that stuff? Is there anything the government ever does that at least has the, as an undertone, a taser or, Pepper spray.
Thing is, a lot of people don't.
Very casual.
So anyway, what this is all about is, putting some restraints on the use of power. This whole contract, even more than the federal contract. If you read the federal contract, there's a lot of open space in it for what the states can do. The states have lots of power to oppress to a certain point. Now, people take differing versions of what the 14th Amendment really says and how that's supposed to work. My reading of the 14th Amendment is pretty plainly the opposite of a lot of people at the New Deal. The 14th Amendment really should be more restrictive on state governments. It should restrict, the states from doing anything that goes beyond the federal restrictions on, like even just the First Amendment, where you have arguably 6 freedoms in that, of religion, building religions, all of that stuff, speech. The idea that states had more power than that originally has been largely removed by the 14th Amendment. So really, states don't have so much power as they used to have in terms of oppressing their citizens. And if you read the Indiana Constitution, it's actually a pretty good limitation on state power. So there isn't a whole lot that the state can do to your daily life in terms of interfering with your power to start a business or to raise your family. Is everybody with me so far? So I guess the point I want to start with is that this business of having rules written down is not a throwaway. And I think the thing that we often miss is that these constitutions were supposed to be short. They were supposed to be not procedural documents. In fact, where the federal and state constitutions screw up the most, in my opinion, is where they throw in too many words, talking about procedure and getting too specific about how things are to be done. Because in essence, these are authorization documents. What they typically do is they'll have something, the legislature is authorized to write laws about this. Okay, so the legislature can write laws about that. No more needs to be said in the Constitution. What I think has happened in the federal Constitution of late with their amendments is that they got that all screwed up, where they just started getting more and more procedural, the amendments started getting longer, more specific, and it started parroting things that were already written in. So it made it, you can read this stuff later. But I think the key thing is that these laws were supposed to be few enough that you can actually know them. If you're taking notes, in fact, what I would really want you to take notes on is that our laws were supposed to be few enough to know, simple enough to understand, and important enough that every single one of them was to be obeyed without exception all the time. And just to expand on that, the idea that laws could be few enough to know, look at how far from that we are right now. Nobody in this room knows the laws by which you are expected to live. You can't possibly know the rules that you're supposed to obey. I mean, these guys are spitting them out like machine gun bullets every day. More laws, more laws, more laws. And you're supposed to live by them. You can't know them. You have lawyers that you have to go to beseech. They're sort of the high priests of law that you have to go to and say, you're a specialist in this particular area of business law because I want to start a business selling cabbage, and you have specialty in cabbage laws. So, I have to talk to you about how I'm supposed to run my business selling cabbage. And then this lawyer will tell you, oh yes, it's a very complicated thing. Only people who have attained this 5th level black belt in my area can understand how to sell cabbage anymore. And that's going to change tomorrow when they pass the new Cabbage Law Act. And that kind of absurdity, that we used to think would be comical in this country. You had people like Charles Dickens writing books about this, how hilarious it was that, the English Chancery law became so ridiculously contorted that nobody could understand it. Well, we've gone way past that. Nobody understands the laws we have in this country. You can't. So first of all, we're supposed to have laws that are few enough that everybody can know how you're supposed to live. The second point is those laws were supposed to be simple enough that everybody can understand. You're not supposed to have a decoder ring to understand the terms of art. In fact, the Indiana Constitution is very clear about laws are supposed to be written in plain speech so that everybody can understand them. Terms of art were not supposed to be employed. That whole idea of terms of art, what the heck? Is anybody a law student before I go on further in this thing? I don't want to step on anybody's toes here.
I'm a law student.
Okay, I'll never return back. Or you would lost me. But this is, I'm not going to be starting a Spanish Inquisition kind of thing against lawyers. Because lawyers have, right now, they have a good gig. We have elected lawmakers. We have chosen to make this a religion of law. And it is that. We have this whole, the way we have abstracted our rules of living is so arcane and weird that we think it's right. A lot of people think it's right, that it should be a specialty where people have to train and study how we are supposed to get along in this world with all of these complicated laws. Well, that's nuts. That was not supposed to be how it was. And anybody who thinks that's modern society, I've heard this many, many times where people say, well, it's a complicated world. We need complicated rules. I've actually heard that said. And I've heard people talking about how well, if you have all of these possibilities, you're going to need laws to cover every single one of these possibilities. Do you think there's anything new about this? Have you guys thought about what a revolution it was when Hammurabi, this was 2,500 years ago, when he actually inscribed 282 laws on stone columns? The idea that you would actually write down laws and have only 282 laws, that was brilliant. People thought this was great. There are only 282 laws. You have these on these 7-foot-tall stone columns, and you could walk into the city and look at these things and say, okay, I can live with this. That's brilliant. It's still brilliant after all of these thousands of years, because our tendency is to just spew laws like crazy. Or even worse than that, you have even like Urukagina's code. He didn't write it down, but he made an attempt to make laws make sense. That in itself was kind of a brilliant idea. So these people have made it in history because they thought, first of all, I want to have laws that make sense. That's a brilliant idea. It shouldn't be brilliant, but that's brilliant. And then we're going to write them down. That shouldn't be brilliant, but that's brilliant. So we remember these guys. And what we should remember really is what was the alternative. The alternative was you had rulers who would make up stuff on the spot. They wouldn't have anything written down, and it didn't have to make sense. So there's nothing new, there's nothing modern, there's nothing smart about having just thousands of words spewing out all of the time that are supposed to apply to your daily life. So really, the idea that laws should be few enough to know and simple enough to understand, that's still brilliant, that's still the way this is supposed to work, and that's still what you should be looking for. Now, the next one is maybe the most important part of this, and that is really where the rule of law comes into play. The idea that all laws are supposed to be obeyed without exception, all the time, by everybody. That means like presidents and stuff. And I think what's more important is when you consider the sort of underlying mood of the constitutions was the higher the authority, the higher the accountability, the higher the responsibility, the more you should be focused on this. We as citizens are not asked, if we're already a citizen, if you're a new citizen, if you're a soldier, if you're a policeman, you make an oath to the constitutions. But most of us, when we're born, we're not asked to make an oath to obey the Constitution, to support and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Most of us are not asked to do that. But I think it's significant that all politicians in Indiana, all federal politicians, anybody who is elected to office, is supposed to, constitutionally, take an oath to support and defend the constitutions of the United States and, or, in the case of Indiana, both Constitution of the federal government and Indiana Constitution. You're supposed to take an oath to these things. And that's because this is supposed to be a reminder that you've got a high office, you are accountable to this document. You're supposed to be, if you're running for governor, you're supposed to be executing this. You're supposed to be enforcing this contract. If you're a legislator, you're supposed to be legislating only within the authority that's granted to you. You're not supposed to be writing laws outside of this contract. If I could have you read just one thing out of this whole Indiana Constitution, and I think it's actually even better than the federal 10th Amendment. And I put this in bold here. Article 1, Section 25. No law shall be passed, the taking effect of which will be made to depend upon any authority except as provided in this Constitution. This, I think, is probably the most important single sentence in the Constitution. No law shall be passed mean, if you just kind of dwell on that for a minute, there is a prohibition on passing any law that is, you read the rest of this, the taking effect of which shall be made to depend upon. Now this is a difficult sentence construction, I know. It's not intuitively obvious on the first blush maybe what this means. And in fact, because of our social constructs over the last 100 years, it's pretty counterintuitive. We've kind of been led to believe that when legislators write laws, well, that's the law. But here it's pretty plain. All authority comes from the Constitution, and writing a law does not add authority. It's supposed to be the case that it's a little difficult to amend constitutions. It's supposed to be kind of a difficult process. It takes a little time. Excuse me, you have to think about it, some deliberation. A lot of people have to sign on to the idea of a constitutional amendment. And that is because the amendment process actually enhances, generally speaking, would be to increase the authority grant of the Constitution. You know, it's never happened before that somebody's amended the Constitution to take away authority. Well, I guess I take that out. There was one a long time ago. The 11th Amendment arguably took away some authority, arguably, in the federal Constitution. But generally speaking, when you're doing an amendment, you're increasing the authority grant you're giving to government. And that's supposed to be a very deliberative, very thoughtful, very sober process. So these words in the Constitution, under the effect of laws, when you're talking about it, it says writing a law does not grant authority. That authority to write the law has to be there already. Do you guys understand what I'm saying here? This is a key part of the Indiana Constitution. It is a key concept of the federal Constitution as clarified by the 10th Amendment. And that idea is that laws do not create authority. You can't just write a law and that's law. If you write a law that's outside the Constitution, any one of us in this room could write a law that would be just as authorized as a law, as any legislation that exists outside constitutional grant. So, if you read other parts of the Constitution where nullification is actually made, like juries have the power of nullification in the courtroom. You've got the power to judge both the law and the facts. In a case, if you're on the jury, you can judge a law. You have more power over the law than the judge does. That's all in the Constitution. Nullification has been affirmed many times by the people who wrote the Constitution. Jefferson and Madison wrote the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, talking all about nullifying the powers that were taken outside the constitutional grant. And if you consider what powers have been granted, most of the laws that are on the books right now are legally, constitutionally, null and void. Now, having said that, understanding that most of the laws that we have are bogus, there are guns behind them. There are jails, and there are people that will enforce those bogus laws. So I guess, it becomes kind of an abstract thing, whether this is bogus or whether the laws we have are bogus. And at that point, it comes back to where I started. It's your choice. You guys have a choice as to whether you want these laws or whether you want the system we have right now, which is really going back thousands of years before Hammurabi, before Urukagina. We don't have laws written down anymore. We have lots of words written down. But every time there's a law that's passed, it has to go to a judge anyway, because everything is now a common law. It has to go to a court. You have to have these people decide, well, is this a law or is it not? How are we going to apply it? So the words of law, no matter who wrote them, don't mean anything anymore. And then we have selective enforcement, where we decide, well, we're not going to enforce this law. And actually, we're only going to enforce this one if we have to. And we're going to pull this one out of our bag if we see somebody that looks suspicious. And, oh, there's a black man in that car. I think I want to look in his trunk. Let's look through the rule book. You'll find something. There's always something you can do to pull somebody over. And that's the state we're in right now, where we don't have written laws. We've got people who have power. We have park rangers who can arrest you for all kinds of stuff in downtown Indianapolis. We've got all kinds of armed agents. We have more anti-civilian guns than Hitler had at his disposal. If you think about the power that can be invoked by our government right now against citizens, it is awesome. And it's our choice. We can get rid of that if we want. We can become that force if we want. It's all a choice. It's how do you want to live? And so really the question always comes back to this. I want you to read this. We don't have it right now, but it still is the law. The federal Constitution is the law, the state Constitution is the law. And what it describes is really, you know, as much as I said, you know, there's stuff in it I don't like, man, it would be a dream to have this back. And we could do it. It would work. It is a compromised document. You know, these contracts are not perfect by my standard, but by living daily life standard, I would go with this easy. It would be an easy call for me to say, let's just do it as written. I'd be fine with that. It's the law. You can have it. But you have to vote for it. You have to fight for it. You have to choose it. And before you choose it, you got to know it. And so looking at the number of people who had not read the Indiana Constitution, let me just say, you know, I don't want to indict, you know, people in particular, but what that tells me is if you read the federal Constitution and you didn't read the state Constitution, but that tells me you really didn't understand the federal Constitution when you read it. Because if you read the federal Constitution, what that should have meant to you is, well, that's cool. That doesn't really apply to me very much. You know, this really, you know, should lead me to something else. It should lead me to the state Constitution. I'm running for the office of U.S. Senator. Now, you guys know the story of the 17th Amendment and how, you know, some people say arguably we lost. Yeah, go ahead.
But you're getting anyways, I'm sorry, I was awkward.
No, I get awkward all the time up here. But anyway, the idea that we have arguably lost the whole concept of state rights because we've made sort of a unit body of our Congress. It used to be a bicameral Congress with two pretty specifically different purposes. And now it's all sort of a soup where now you've got, you know, the House of Representatives, we expect them to be, you know, they fight a little bit more maybe. The senators, you know, have to stand a little bit taller, they have their noses a little higher. But other than that, there really isn't a whole lot of difference between their roles. Now, my idea of the U.S. Senate is, I mean, the 17th Amendment really didn't change anything. It didn't change things the way a lot of people who say, oh, we need to get rid of the 17th Amendment. You know, it doesn't. The procedure of choosing our senators is different, and I believe it's wrong. I'm sorry that we passed the 17th Amendment, but it doesn't really change anything as far as the Constitution, as far as I'm concerned. So the job I'm running for is entirely different than the job that the other candidates are running for. I'm going to be making my oath to this contract too. You know, my whole purpose of going to the Senate would be to represent Indiana in that Congress that has no representation for Indiana right now. You've got these people that are known for foreign policy. Oh yes, we're very interested in foreign policy. Why exactly are we interested in foreign policy? Why are we interested in what France is doing when we can't get Indiana together? And we have no defense against the federal government. Nobody. Who is defending Indiana's rights? Who is defending this thing right now? We didn't elect a governor who would do that. I ran for governor twice, and 2.5 million people told me bug off in a single day. So not that I'm taking that personally against you, but we did not choose anybody to defend the Indiana Constitution from inside Indiana. I'm not really holding my breath that people are going to be doing anything different on the federal level, but I do hope. You know, I keep running for office based on the same stuff I always have, based on my idea that these laws are good and we should do them, and that I have hope that people will choose them. Now, as a candidate, I can't do anything that you guys have to do. You know, you guys have to make the choice. You know, when it comes to who's going to be your candidate for governor, who's going to be representing you in the Senate, you know, candidates make a big deal about what they do. You know, say, oh, we raise lots of money. We have this good campaign team. I got an excellent campaign manager back there, Jerry Clayton, by the way. But that has nothing to do with your choice. Oh, my wife is over there too.
She's my assistant.
Yeah. So, you know, the idea that candidates really matter in this process, not so much. You know, the idea that we can really do stuff, and, you know, I hear people talking about brilliant tactics and, you know, how much their fundraising did this, and no, it's your choice. It always comes down to voters. Voters run the country on election day. Now, you really run the country on every other day too. You just don't think so. You know, you look to see what power, you know, happened with, you know, when the Tea Party people first started going. You know, they were really powerful. You know, before they decided to get, you know, all idolaters with Glenn Beck and all of these. There ain't Glenn Beck fans. And I'm probably offending pretty much everybody at some point. If I haven't offended you, let me know and I'll
Work on that.
Anyway, when you look to see what the Occupy Wall Street people, what they do at the beginning is very powerful. They get together and stuff happens. When we had in, was that 2007, when a bunch of us got on the governor's mansion lawn, we were protesting taxes. At least they called it a tax protest. My idea was I wanted to talk about constitutional rule of law. The media turned it into a tax protest. It gained steam. Some people say that was the start of the Tea Party movement. We ended up firing the whole city council, got rid of Mark Peterson, who was the president of the mayor's council. That was a big, powerful thing that citizens did all in a single day. They could just wipe out an entire branch of government if they want to. They can take out the executive. They can do whatever they want anytime they want. That's the power you guys actually have. If you want this, you can have it. So when I'm talking to you as a candidate and I'm telling you what I intend to do, it's only if you make that choice. And as far as what that choice really means, you know what we're facing right now. We've got so much money and entrenchment of ideas and abstractions that are very powerful. People have always thought that, well, you got to vote for the two-party system. We have a two-party system. Where did that? It's not in there. There's no two-party system in the constitutions. And we have this two-party system idea that the two parties have told you about, but it's not like there have ever actually been only two parties. And in fact, those two parties have shifted a great deal over the last 100 years. You think about what Democrats used to be, the solid South, states' rights, small government people, when the Republicans were the ones who gave us, the tree-hugging liberals like Roosevelt, who was the first guy to propose universal health care, and the Republicans were the hard left-leaning people that we would think of as Democrats today. And they've been like this ever since then. And the idea that we have two parties is first of all bogus. The idea that those parties have any power, that's unconstitutional. It's not supposed to be like that in the constitutions. And so if we were to get rid of all those abstractions, all of those things that, that don't exist in constitutions, and in fact, just for a minute, we don't have constitutions either. Just clean slate. Put your mind in the idea that you can have what you want. Make a picture of what that is you want. I'm betting that if you guys were to get more than 5 people together and you were to write down some rules as to how you wanted this country to work, you would end up getting pretty close to what we already have as law. Now, the advantage of using the constitutions as the basis for what we should be doing going forward is that they've already been passed. They really are already law. And it really should be the case that we're not the ones who have to defend anything against the other guys. They're the ones who are supposed to be saying, we should be telling them, what are you doing on the ballot? Why are you still here, Mr. Status Quo? You have failed. Everything you've done over the last 100 years has been stupid. The violence, the incessant wars, the crazy economics, it's not working. I should not be the one who has to explain what I'm doing running for office. It should be Lugar, who's been in Senate for 100 years. I didn't say that. Sorry.
36 to be exact.
But if you think about it, who is it really that should be defending their position? It shouldn't be me. All I want is what other people a long time ago agreed is the best deal ever. This is better than Hammurabi's law. Everybody in the world at one point thought this is great stuff. We threw it away. Yet this still would work if we tried it, and it would work a heck of a lot better than what we got right now. So my idea is that, give you guys some idea about what this is. You have to read it. I can't read it for you. You have to read it. And if you want it, I'm putting it on the ballot. It'll be there. You can vote for it. If you want to be part of the thing, you can join me and we can have lots of fun. Good, clean, wholesome fun for everyone. And really, that's about all I have to say about the constitutions, other than you just got to read them, no shortcut to it. And if you have any questions, I would always be willing to answer them, and that's what I'm all about. And that's all I've been about for a long time. One thing I do have to say, I have to make a shout out. I guess I'm sort of a rarity anymore, and that I have actually, I got excited about rule of law and stuff before I knew about Ron Paul. But, Ron Paul, probably more than any single person I'm aware of, I'm even going back to people like Thomas Jefferson and other people that, they said great things, they did great stuff. You look at their personal moral life, that's good. But if you look at somebody like Ron Paul, who's, not perfect, he's human, But this guy's been like a rock, unlike most people in history. And I have to say that just in terms of what, you know, any single person can do, he's done an awful lot. And yet, you know, for the first 30 years of his political activity, he was nothing. He was nobody. He was a zealot from Texas. We know what people from Texas are like. So it's not like, you know, he got any kind of traction, but all of a sudden, stuff is starting to move. If I have to say that there are any good signs right now, it's that you guys are in this room because of, you know, I see, you know, a Gadsden flag, you know, you see some things coming back. Maybe not everybody's read the constitutions yet, but as far as like what is different from when I went to college, holy cow. You know, just to give you just a little more background, this might be helpful. Because I already kind of offended you guys by talking about how you're stupid if you didn't read the state constitution. I read the federal Constitution for the first time when I was about 30. I didn't read the state constitution until I was about 40. Now that's 10 years that I should have done. I told you guys, boy, you're stupid if you didn't read the state constitution. Well, it took me 10 years to sort of make that connection that, holy cow. I read the federal constitution, and I thought, well, what the heck does this have to do with anything? And I kind of set it aside. And I wasn't really thinking much about, you know, the political connection of the Constitution to me. You know, I didn't think about that for a while. But because of certain people like Ron Paul and other people in the liberty movement, you know, the Libertarian Party in particular, that has been very powerful in pushing the Republican Party to, and just think back, when the Libertarian Party started, Nixon was the Republican Party, wage and price controls. He gave us the EPA. Executive orders like crazy to invent all kinds of agencies. That's the Republican Party. That still is the Republican Party in its guts. And if you were to see who is still the precinct committee members, who's still running the show, it's still the Nixon Republicans. So if you're looking at, you know, what really has happened in the last 10 years with people like Ron Paul and the Libertarian Party, it's been powerful. And you guys have an advantage that, you know, people in my generation did not have. So you guys have lots of information. You have the ability to change stuff. And I'm counting on you guys because I've got kids. You're going to be brought into your world, and you're going to have to fix my mess. Okay, anybody have any questions?
What is the Kernan-Shepard Commission?
Well, you know, there is a kind of a lofty commission, one of those blue ribbon things that was put together several years ago. When was that first? 2000.
So 6 years old, I think.
Yeah. So
I think they made the report in 2009, 10, final report, 2009.
Yeah, but they started this some time ago, and it has, you know, basically, I'll just give you the sort of the overall view of this commission. Is that all of these pesky little local governments are getting in the way of good government, and we really need to centralize everything from the governor's office and make appointments everywhere so that we don't have county commissioners and county governments. Just get rid of all of that stuff. We could do everything from this, you know, and now it's the, you know, we're in a new age and we're modern people, and we can go back 7,000 years to absolute power in the hands of few. That's basically what that's what they concluded. And that they called this inefficient system of having multiple layers of government is unsustainable. When actually, if you look at what I put in historical, you know, context of the Indiana Constitution, we are, by this report, going exactly back to one of the things that prompted the writing of the 1851 Constitution. The 1816 Constitution was in most ways better. It was much more firmly restraining government to very few things. It was an excellent constitution. But one thing that it did have as a flaw is it didn't actually specify, but it made it open for central appointments for, you know, county offices. So you didn't have county sheriffs and stuff like that that were created by constitutional mandate. So what could happen is originally you could have the governor make appointments, you know, all around the state, and that these guys would make like little fiefdoms and can control things under the you know, one powerful umbrella. And that was very corrupt, and that was one of the good ideas of the 1851 Constitution. And that's one of the few things that's actually better. And that's exactly what the Kernan-Shepard Commission said we should dissect and get rid of. So it would be basically going back, you know, thousands of years to the same old idea of it's good to be the king. So, I mean, you could read it. It's a longish report, much longer than the Constitution's. I wouldn't recommend reading it until you've read this first. But if you read this and then read the Kernan-Shepard Commission, there should be a couple of aha moments. Any other questions? Yes?
I do apologize for my ignorance when it comes to the Indiana Constitution, but I was reading about a couple of months ago about a law mimicking the Arizona law when it comes to immigration, and I was just wondering how would you interpret the Indiana Constitution when it talks about immigration?
That is an excellent question, because one of the things I find ironic, I read the Arizona Constitution. I read it when a lot of this stuff was coming up. That I thought this seems kind of fishy that they would have to write a law when it's already in the Arizona Constitution that they have absolute power over what happens with, if they wanted to deny employment status to illegal aliens, they could do that. They have all kinds of power. In fact, if you read the federal Constitution, read the state Constitution, and look for where the federal government has absolute control over what happens within the borders of the state, you won't find any. The states have all the power they need to do whatever they want with illegal aliens. Now, that having been said, we have got a lot of things screwed up with illegal aliens, and the reason we have so many illegal aliens, and the reason we have so much trouble with our labor, legal labor, as we call it, legal labor, is now almost impossible. And if you're running a small concrete, like a concrete contracting business or something, and you want to be competitive with one of the big guys, you're going to have a hard time making a go of it when he's already hiring illegal aliens to do an awful lot of his work. And you could go to Indianapolis, go to any place where they've got a consulate office, and you could say, I want to get some workers. And for, past $50 here or something like that, and you can get a whole busload of illegal aliens who do good concrete work. They do good work, and they're not going to complain. You're not going to have any trouble with them because they know that they could be deported at any minute, and you won't have to deal with unemployment compensation insurance and all of that kind of stuff. So because of our laws and regulations, we have created a bizarre, unsustainable, crazy economic problem that's required a fix with illegal aliens. Now, I don't know what you guys think about our illegal alien problem. We've been ignoring it for decades. I wrote an article about this for the Indianapolis Star years and years ago, and I got lots of mail that people thought, "What are you saying?" Blah blah blah. But at that time, it wasn't a popular thing to talk about back then. But we've had illegal aliens pouring into this country for decades, and laws that were passed in the '80s accelerated that. And because of we have 1/10 of Mexico now within our borders. We've got a huge problem just in terms of all of these illegal aliens sucking up our communalized resources. But let's make sure we understand what the real problems are. The real problems are socialism, first of all, because when you're talking about we don't like these illegal aliens getting free health care. I work at a hospital. I know that if an illegal alien comes in, we have to give him health care. We can't charge him. You're going to have to pay for it if you come into the hospital. You're going to have to pay for him. And we get mad about that. But it's not because of the illegal alien, it's because it's socialized. It's because we have hooks in each other and we're unfairly paying for other people's stuff. So that's a problem. The fact that they were lured here by jobs that they can do that we can't get our own people to do, that's another problem. But those problems are not their problems. So before I say too much about illegal aliens and the power of state to deal with it, I first have to address why we have this problem. And the reason we have this problem with illegal aliens is because we're stupid. Now, the second part of this issue is, if the states already, by their constitutions, have power over who is a citizen and who gets the benefits of citizenship, states already have that power. Read the constitutions. And in fact, Arizona being a border state, Texas being a border state, they already have in their constitutions things related to people coming across the border from the other country. So they've already thought of this a long time ago, and they've got power to deal with it if they want to invoke it. They didn't have to write that law. It was absolutely unnecessary. They didn't have to do it. If they were to read their own constitution, they would see that they're already authorized to deal with illegal aliens within their borders. Now, the federal government doesn't have any such power. Really, if you read the federal government, all it does is basically say they have the power for standardizing the citizenship requirements. And they did that fine. We know what was required. That was something they could do by statute. They could say this is what's required to be a citizen. but it doesn't give them any authority to police within the states. It doesn't give them any authority to kick out illegal aliens should they appear within the state. It just doesn't have that authority. Yes.
Last question.
As far as notification is concerned, you get the federal government, like say, you know, Indiana, by some miracle, was to, you know, legalize marijuana. You think the federal government, well, as they've been doing in California, would crack down or use violence within the borders?
It's your choice. It's your choice. Everything, whether it's a Supreme Court decision or, I mean, the Supreme Court is a political entity like anything else. They are susceptible to political pressure from citizens. Anything that happens anywhere in government is related to your choices. So if you decide that you want to legalize, no, you don't have to legalize anything. I'm not a big fan of marijuana. Is really not one of my issues. It's not a big deal. But there is no law. The 18th Amendment gave the government the power to render illegal the sale and distribution of alcohol. That was it. The 21st Amendment removed that power. The government has never had any authorization to regulate the sale of anything other than that 18th Amendment, and the 18th Amendment is gone. So actually, legally, there is no law against selling, buying marijuana. That having been said, we don't have constitutions because we don't want them. We have chosen the opposite of constitutions. We have chosen to empower these people to do whatever the heck they want because we trust them and we love them. And so if we continue voting the same way, then yes, there's nothing to stop them because we've not made any decision that's different from what's been in the past. So if California says we want to be able to sell marijuana, then it depends whether the governor is going to enforce it, whether he's going to kick the county sheriffs. They have absolute power over that kind of stuff when it comes to what happens in their county. They could tell the feds to get out. We have jurisdiction here, you don't. There's all kinds of power constitutionally, but if nobody's going to take it, then the feds win. Because we have an idea of a hierarchy that's not constitutional. We have the idea that the federal government is higher than the states. That's not constitutional. It's just like, in my family, it depends on, Wendell and I have an arrangement where we have distribution of things that happen, and that she does all the work, I do all the talking. So when it comes to, we don't tread on each other's territory. I try not to do any work. So when it comes to things, it's not that we're different levels because we're both parents of these kids and they're supposed to be people below us, but there are different things. And it's the same thing with the federal government and state government. The federal government has different responsibilities than the states. And for us to think that the federal government is higher, it's kind of like you have kings and you've got all of these people underneath, unless you have a pope, then well, maybe the pope and the king fight it out. That's not the way it's supposed to be. It's very limited engagement. The federal government has authority over the states and only a few things as described in the federal constitution. It's all written down. And where that isn't actually given to them, according to the 10th Amendment, if it isn't given to the federal government, then it belongs to the states and to the people. And according to the state constitution, the state only has certain authority. They don't have authority over me and my family. They can't make me do Wendell's work, for instance. So the fact that we have these things that are written down contractually is the whole point I'm trying to make here. It's all written down. If we want it, we can have it. If we don't want this as written, we don't have any of it. Either you have the rule of law or you don't. It's actually pretty simple. If you don't have the whole First Amendment, you don't have any of it. And if you don't have the First Amendment, you don't have the Constitution. And just to underline that point, you guys right now do not have constitutional rule of law. You have no rights. You have no rights. There is nothing you have that can't be taken away from you for the Colts. There's nothing that you have that you can be tasered for just about anything. You can be pepper sprayed, obviously, for just about anything. You don't have rights because you don't have constitutional rule of law. If you want it, it means you have to change your mind. You have to change your choices. Voters have to change. It's not the government that needs to change. Voters have to change what they choose. This whole idea of, we need new representatives, we need new, get rid of all of Congress. No, we need new voters. We need people to change their mind about their expectations of government and how they want to live their lives. Oh, one more thing. Do we have a piece of paper I could pass around for sign up? Anybody want to sign up for my campaign? Okay. You can do so.
Hello, everybody. Right now on the schedule it says we have lunch from 1 to noon, and seeing as I was tardy and 20 minutes late, we got started 20 minutes late, so we're still 20 minutes behind. There's a place like 3 blocks down the road, for those of you here from Baton Eric, which is the same place. Grab some food. I think lunch is on your own, but the $5 pays for dinner tonight, is that not mistaken? Okay. And so with that, I will actually request that if you get food, could you bring it back here rather than eating it there so we can get started. I actually have to leave a little bit earlier to get back to Purdue today because, but I'd like to kind of leave some of the discussion from 1 to 2:30. So in order to get as much time as possible, I would ask you to bring the food back.